And welcome everybody to tonight's webinar on eco-villages and activism. I'm Starhawk. I am speaking you tonight from the land of the Kashaya Pomo on the very west coast of Turtle Island, the North American continent, and Charles is on the very east coast. This is land that's been tended by indigenous people for tens of thousands of years, very elegantly, very carefully, and it's a land with a heritage of colonization. It's the furthest south the Russians got on the west coast back in the day when they were hunting otter here and established a fort, Fort Ross. Then later it was the Californians and the Mexicans and the Americans, but the Kashaya are still here. They still are doing incredible art, which they've always been known for, and crafts, and have recently regained a big chunk of land on the coast, and that gives them access once again to some of their traditional fishing and gathering grounds, which is really beautiful. So I invite you to put into the chat the traditional peoples of the land that you might be on. And we always like to start our events with a little bit of magic, creating a magic circle. And I think we're in a moment of time right now where tension is mounting and anxieties and feelings of all sorts. So I think a little grounding is always good for us. So take a breath and settle yourself and put your feet on the ground. Take some deep breaths in and out. As you breathe, feel your roots pushing down into the earth, all the way down through the soil, the mud, the rock, the water, down through the bedrock and into that heart of fire at the core of the earth. And take a breath. If there's anything you want to release and let go of, just let it go. Down into that fire. With another breath. And maybe one big breath, put your whole body into it. Just And now with a big inhale, imagine you could draw some of that fire up through your roots, up through your feet, up through all those layers of soil and mud and rock and water, up into your feet and legs, up into the base of your spine, your belly. Taking a deep breath, breathe that energy up your spine, up into your heart. Take a moment, just feel some of your heart connections right now. And breathe it up and out the top of your head like branches, and feel them reach up to the sky and sweep back down and touch the earth again. Feel the sunlight on those leaves and branches. Or maybe where you are, it's already moonlight or starlight. Take a deep breath and draw some of that energy in and down. Down through the top of your head. Down through your heart and hands and belly. Down through your legs and feet into the earth. Just feel the energy coming up and through you, down and through you. And just take a moment and rest and feel your connection to place. And blessed be. Now, if you take a breath, you can imagine breathing out a little like thread of light. And imagine all of us in all the different places we are breathing out these little threads, and all those threads connecting us and making a great web. It links into that other web we call the World Wide Web, links us together and creates our magic circle for tonight. And our circle is cast.
And my name's Charles Williams. Happy acknowledging it's Truth and Reconciliation Day here in the territory of the Mi'kmaq people, where I'm at right now. And let's call in the directions. I'm here on the eastern coast of North America, Turtle Island, where the sun rises, where the moon rises. Let's invite that light in. And invite those breezes in from the east. For tonight, we're going to get to hear stories which come from the winds out of the east. Maybe we'll learn something new, like the dawning of the day. So let's invite in eastern air with a big breath in. Welcome air, welcome east. And to the south and fire, where creativity is. There are many an eco-village and many activists in the south. I'm going to call to that, the spirit of change, the spirit of community, that fire that brings us together. I say, welcome fire. And to west, water. I call to the waters. We've had some great rain in the last 2 weeks. I know some places have been getting a lot of rain. We're going to call to the gentle rains, the rains that we want to come and water our gardens, to fill our cisterns, to wash away the dust. I'm going to call to that gentle rain. The emotions of love and care that we hold for each other. And say, welcome to water, welcome to west. And to the north, earth, where it's the darkest, where we see the stars, the North Star that doesn't move. The earth, where we plant our seeds and our food grows, where we build our communities and tend each other. To the physical world, I say, welcome, welcome earth. And tonight we'll be talking about activism and eco-villages and the place of center where we come together, where the spirit of me and the spirit of you come to the spirit of us. I'm going to call to the spirit, whatever name that is. Say, welcome spirit. Welcome everybody. Welcome to tonight.
Thank you, Charles. And just want to send a thought out and a little bit of prayer and protection to all of our friends who are in the path of the hurricane and the floods and the rains in North Carolina and other places, all the way down through Florida. I know some of our dear friends live in that area and I think are still out of power. And we know that this is one of those impacts of climate change that we are working to mitigate. And I just really feel for those who are directly suffering right now, the impact of that. We like to think in permaculture like we have an answer for everything. We have a cure. We can tell you how to fix it. And to some extent, I mean, we do have we know how to mitigate the risk of floods and droughts and fires and everything else. But we also know that nature is bigger than us and that these events happen that are beyond our control. And they require something more than just our individual efforts to deal with. We're also going to be talking about our friends from Lebanon tonight. And there's a lot going on in the world right now that I think makes our hearts very heavy. But hopefully, one of the things you'll take from tonight is a sense of hope because for me, this summer, my travels has really been a lesson in appreciating the resilience of human beings and how many people there are out there in the face of all kinds of challenges who are working for healing, working for regeneration, exploring new ways of living together. So we're going to jump in and start. So this summer, I didn't really consciously plan it this way, but it turned out to be the Eco Village tour. I ended up going to, I think, 3 different eco villages in France, 2 in Spain, and 1 in Ukraine, and teaching at or doing a talk and a ritual at one of them and teaching at the others. Just visiting a couple, but it was quite an education and quite exciting. I'd been to some before, some were new to me, and I'm gonna take you on a little tour right now. So I'm gonna share my screen. All right, and we're gonna begin in Brittany at a place that's called Lazade, which means the area of defense in France, the autonomous zone. And it's an area of close to 4,000 acres in eastern Brittany, near Nantes. And this is an area where back in the 60s, the government decided they were going to build a giant airport, even though there already was one in Nantes, about half an hour away. And they evicted a lot of farmers from their land to confiscate the land for this airport. And the farmers and the local people resisted. They really didn't want an airport in their sleepy little villages in their beautiful agricultural land. Some of the farmers left, but some of the families refused to go and stayed and essentially squatted their own farms and their own buildings. And back in the early 2000s, they never quite got around to building the airport. And the resistance carried on for decades. Back in the early 2000s, they got together with some activists who heard about this and came and squatted some of the empty farmhouses and made alliances with the local farmers. And there was a huge attempt to evict them in 2012 with masses of police. A lot of people came out in support, and they had like tear gas and stun guns and riot cops and everything out in the middle of the countryside. They did evict some of people, but a lot were able to stay. And the activists had not just squatted, but they'd actually rebuilt houses, they'd built bakeries, they had a blacksmith shop, they had businesses. They really had turned this into a truly autonomous area. At one point, they actually blocked the road, right? And made it literally an autonomous zone and refused to allow any police in once they chased them out. Um, when Macron got elected, after he got elected, they finally decided to cancel the airport. There was a lot of popular support and solidarity for the activists. And so, but then they made another attempt to evict all the squatters in 2018. And again, there was massive resistance, enormous amounts of conflict with the police. They did evict about a third of the households, but there were something like 50 or 70 projects, I think, and they evicted about 20 of them, but a lot of them still remain. And many of them had decided to go through process of legalization and are still there. So this is one of the projects where our friends JJ and Isa live. It's called La Rolandière. It's basically they're artists and sculptors, and they do a lot of art activism. And this is like it's built on the site the spot that was going to be the control tower for the airport. So it's a tower, it's an observation tower. Um, and underneath it is a library and a kind of museum of the whole history of the struggle at Lazad. And it's an intentional community where people live. This is a map of the whole little region. That's what some of the demonstrations were like. Everything from barricades to tractors, and this incredible alliance between the activists and the local farmers. Not always smooth, but it worked. So when they started evicting in 2018, one of the groups decided they were going to resist eviction, and their act of resistance, they were going to build a barn that was meant to last for 1,000 years. A beautiful timber frame barn using traditional building techniques and natural building, made with timber from the local forests. And they built this beautiful barn that is an incredible example of really skilled woodworking. Everything's timber framed, all the timbers are pegged together without nails or screws or metal brackets. It's all the old traditional joinery. And it really is, this is actually another gathering space that they built, but they really are incredible builders. And they have revived traditional forms of building with earth and clay and wood. And now they're creating these gorgeous houses. This is the library and the living area of the intentional community underneath that watchtower. And I had been there years before, and I was really impressed at how beautiful they had made it now. They have their own sawmill in that barn, and they log the national forests around them sustainably with horses so that they have very little impact on the land, and then use the timber to rebuild the houses. So everything's coming right from the local area. And it's one of the many kind of little businesses and enterprises they've set up in this area. This is another house that they're rebuilding. They're using a Japanese woodworking technique where they actually scorch the siding to carbonize it so that it's resistant to rot and resistant to bugs that way. And it looks really quite beautiful. And there's the interior. And again, I don't know if you could see, but all these things are pegged together. Uh, my one criticism of their building technique, and I find this often in intentional communities and people have composting toilets, is they seem to have this compulsion to build their composting toilets up like on little towers that you have to access through rickety staircases that are not really so easy to use if you're a little older and creakier. So if I were giving feedback to my friends at La Rolandière, I said, how about you build a low-level accessible composting toilet? Because there's no reason why it can't be. I learned a lot, for me, one of my interests in visiting the eco-villages was the social permacultures, we call it, the interactions between people. Because, we tend to romanticize community living, and people like dream of living in intentional community or an eco-village or a collective house and having wonderful people around them all the time. But community living is actually one of the most difficult things to do in the world. It's challenging because it involves living with people, and people are difficult to get along with at best, right? They have their own ideas and they don't always want to do what I want to do. So I was also interested in learning what some of the social permaculture was and some of the issues had been. And when we've done the tour, if we have some time for questions and stuff, I'll talk some more about that. Then we went down to a place called Grand'Essence in the Ardèche region of France. That's another eco-village that was started not so much out of protest, but just with people who really wanted to live close to the land, live simply, and find ways of making a living that were integrated with land and place and community. It's this very beautiful region I liked a lot because it reminded me a lot of where I live, where we also have hills like that, mountains. That's me and my co-teacher, Alfred Decker, standing by the poster we found in the local co-op about our course. And the eco-village is built on land that had belonged to a single family for 500 years. The wonderful thing about eco-villages in Europe is that many of them, have these old, beautiful buildings and structures to work with in a way that we just don't have on this side of the Atlantic. And so they had some very beautiful buildings that they had renovated into kind of bed and breakfasts and gathering spaces. And they had smaller spaces they'd built for living spaces. And one of the common patterns I found was having beautiful community spaces, and then people would have individual living spaces in trailers or in smaller cabins or things that they built for themselves. And so we met there, and we were able to bring these 7 beautiful young people from Lebanon to the course. We did a special fundraising right before to support them being able to come. And it was a bit nerve-wracking, even knowing if they were going to be able to come, because the threat of war was already looming with Israel. the day they were supposed to leave, flights were being canceled and wasn't clear if planes were going to go, but they were all able to get there. And it was, I can't tell you what a gift it was to have them with us. Um, they, to me, are just such an inspiration because Lebanon, even before this most recent assault by Israel, has just been through so much. You know, there's been something like 700% inflation, and people have lost all of their savings and all of the money, and pensions, and things that they had counted on. They had that horrific explosion in the port a few years ago that killed hundreds of people and traumatized everybody and destroyed a lot of downtown Beirut. They have had this constant ongoing, you know, low-level war with Israel in the south of Lebanon that resulted in lots of displaced people, people having to flee their homes and leave. And the response of our friends to all of this was, let's save seeds. Let's do regenerative agriculture. Let's find ways of healing the land. Some of them have had access to land in villages and outside the city that's been relatively safe. In the north of Lebanon, how do we restore it? How do we actually think about food and food sovereignty in a crisis situation? So I was just so admiring of both their courage and also just their spirit and their humor, sense of fun. And it was really a gift to have them with us. So, Grand Essence, this is their outdoor kitchen where they cook all the food for the groups and the meals. They're a bilingual community, so the people there both speak both French and English. Yes, there are a lot of some Americans and English people who have partnered up with French people and decided to make that a feature of their eco-village. So it's a beautiful traditional stone-built oven, and this is a rocket stove designed to cook with relatively small amounts of wood. And there's our group under the linden tree. It's a tradition in that part of France when you buy land or build a new house to plant a linden tree. And because this land had been in the hands of the same family for 500 years, there was this beautiful 500-year-old linden tree. They grow their own grain there, their own wheat, and this was their mill. It was sort of an antique mill that they had found somewhere and refurbished and got it working so they can mill their grain in very small amounts and make their own flour for baking their own bread. And then they bake bread a couple times a week. They bake hundreds of loaves because they sell at the local farmers markets and sell to some of the local restaurants and also supply bread for the community and for the groups that come there. You can see them kneading the dough in these giant troughs. And then they have another huge oven where they bake the bread, and that big wheel there turns a big round, like a giant lazy Susan inside, where the loaves circulate around so they can move it around to put them in and take them out. And really good bread. We also were able to have kids there at this training and had a special program going for the kids alongside. So they were having fun on the swings under the linden tree. It's Alfred with his daughter. We always start our group in our morning with honoring the elements and the directions. So this time I had people make living sculptures of the different elements. And there's a lot of hands-on stuff we do in our design courses, including digging swales, working with the contours of the land to capture and store water. The group was collecting duff from the forest. The eco-village was right on the edge of a beautiful forest and had trails where you could just go walk for miles and miles and miles. And then we're making a leaf ferment for fertilizer. And that's Roman, who's one of the founders of the eco-village. It's a couple of our Lebanese students again. On the natural building, I'm building a bench. It wasn't just the kids who enjoyed playing on the swings. Then we
Hey,
went down.
Star,
Yeah.
we can swap our interpreters. Our other interpreter got on, so
Oh, great. Wonderful. Welcome, Moonbeam. Glad to see you. So yeah, let's take a breath and give them a chance to settle in and swap out. So the next eco-village was one called Saint Camel down in the Pyrenees. And this one was built on from an old monastery. So they were able to take again this beautiful building and convert it into a place with meeting rooms, a cafe down below, bed and breakfast, and community rooms, and then little satellite houses where community members live. And we went there just for a shorter training and for the end of a conference that they were doing of a whole network of eco-villages. And I was also very impressed at how big the movement is in France and in Europe. There were something like 600 or 700 people at this conference. We did a spiral dance with all of them. It was kind of a challenge, but nobody got hurt. I think everyone had a good time. They also had a lovely little fairy woods with all kinds of little shrines and altars and everything along the way. And I don't have a lot of other pictures there because we were there for a short time, but we did a social permaculture course there. And again, it was interesting, really interesting to hear from people involved in eco-villages all over France about some of the challenges and conflicts that people were facing, and also just to see how many inspiring people were doing incredible things. And a lot of incredibly artistic and talented people seem to be involved in that movement in France. Then we went down to Catalonia, the north of Spain, although the Catalonians don't like to consider themselves really part of Spain. And I had a short visit at an incredible intentional community called Visalia, where they were able to get hold of what had been a gigantic factory complex with housing for 100 worker families and to take over this whole complex that had been abandoned and start renovating the housing. And, really nicely built stuff. Alfred had helped to found the community, although he's not living there at the moment, but the mother of his kids lives there, and his kids spend much of their time there. Those are his twins. So, um, and then we went to an amazing place called Camas Deo in Barcelona. Um, Camas Deo is a community that was founded, I think, about 15 years ago at least. And a bunch of activists again took over and squatted what had actually originally been a leper colony, a hospital run by nuns on the edge of Barcelona. So it's this huge, you know, building and structure, again, beautifully built, and it had been abandoned, and they took it over and began renovating it, cleaning it up, turning it into living spaces and gathering spaces, and then taking the grounds around it. There's like a kind of park-like open space that's around it where people walk a lot, walk their dogs, and just get out of the city. It's really on the edge of the city. You can actually take the subway there and then walk about half a mile and you're at Camas Deo. So it's very close in. And that's a pathway leading up. So they have a big community kitchen, and they eat all their meals together. They buy food together. The people who live there now, I think it costs them something like 150 euros a month for their rent, their utilities, their food, and everything. So it makes it very easy for people who want to live there, to live economically, and afford it. And Martin, who's there in the apron, makes beer and sells it at the cafe and um, the coffee houses that they run on weekends and the open mics, and that's how he supports himself. So they have a big industrial kitchen where they can cook for lots of people, and they also do catering where they'll cook a meal for a group. And we actually had them cook a meal for us and some of our friends we wanted to meet with in Barcelona, and some of our students who were there. Did a beautiful lunch for us all. You can see every good intentional community has a meeting agenda, facilitator. A lot of the grounds have been turned into community gardens, and they have enough of them that they can grow food for themselves and also offer garden spaces to the local people from the neighborhood who want a plot. It's one of their composting toilets. Again, they avoided the tower, but they do have the staircase. And their work schedule and chore schedule. They've also done some natural building and some really innovative things like this solar shower. That's Martin's house that he built out of cob. so that he can have his own little space outside of the community space. And it's all built with cob with a reciprocal roof, which is an amazing way to build a roof where all of these poles kind of sit on top of each other and are mutually supportive. He showed us how you did it. You could do it basically with chopsticks. You can see there, it's just 5 chopsticks supporting each other and support this heavy mug. I still don't truly really understand it, but it did work. And there's their outdoor eating space where we had our nice lunch. And one of the activists who lived there for a time actually got elected as mayor of Barcelona and sort of made the transition into electoral politics and has brought a lot of progressive ideas and ecological ideas into the mainstream in Barcelona. And then I went to the Ukraine. Alfred was in touch a lot with the Global Eco-Village Network, has a branch in Ukraine, and they had brought him there in May to do a teacher training for permaculture, and he was all excited about the idea of going together and doing a training, but the only time they could do it were when his kids were starting a new school, so I went without him. But I had an amazing experience there. I was very excited to go because that's the land my grandparents all came from. Um, and they all emigrated to the US in the early 1900s. But my grandmother used to tell stories about Ukraine and about um, how she didn't really want to go and how beautiful it was in the spring with the trees by the river. And I'd always wanted to go and see the land they came from. Um, so Alfred assured me that where I was going was going to be relatively safe, and the real danger would be simply an air raid or something while I was going through Kiev. But luckily that didn't happen, and I was actually, I was kind of expecting Kiev to be something like my picture of London, during World War II, during the Blitz, with shortages and air raids, but actually it really seemed like a big modern city that was functioning pretty much normally. With things were available. The main difference was you couldn't fly there. We had to go to Moldova and take a long train ride to get there. Um, and there are air raids there, but mostly at night. And we were really only there for a day and then got taken out to the eco village. But you could see there were places where there was damage. There were places where there were these metal things they call hedgehogs that they would put out as barricades to stop the Russian tanks when they thought the tanks were going to roll in at the beginning of the war. And there's the huge memorial in the central square there, in Maidan Square. Each one of those flags represents someone who's been killed in the war. And it was very moving to walk around through there. Some of them had names, some of them had pictures and little stories. It was a little bit like the AIDS quilt, those of you who remember that. but just seeing like the masses and masses of flags and feeling like every single one of those flags represented a life really gave me a sense of the incredible cost of this horrible war. And there was also a memorial to the people who died in their revolution in 2014 when they took over the square in protest and basically were able to throw out their corrupt, sort of pro-Russian government and put in a new government that was, I won't say it ended corruption because people were complaining about corruption still, but it was not such a big fan of Putin and the Russians, and it was more pro-democracy and pro-Western. And in the course of that, over 100 people were shot and killed in the square. So each one had a picture and a name, and then you could click on this little QR code and it would tell you a story about the person and something about their lives. And then we got driven out to this beautiful eco-village by this beautiful lake where everything was calm and quiet and peaceful. And it's the dome that belongs to the eco-village. And rather than me telling you all about it, we have a little recording from our friends from Ukraine that we're going to play for you. It's our group inside the dome. And Charles, maybe you can put that up for us.
Okay, here it comes.
Thanks.
Hello, my name is Anastasia. I'm head of the NGO Permaculture in Ukraine. I live in the eco village Zeleny Kruchi in the central part of Ukraine with my husband and my daughter. I've been living here for 11 years already. Zeleny Kruchi is part of the Ukrainian network of eco villages and Ukrainian network of permaculture centers. We organize trainings, host different events, volunteers, and since the beginning of the full-scale Russian invasion, we have been hosting internally displaced people as well as other villages and permaculture centers all over Ukraine. This big project was called Green Road of Eco-Villages, when two NGOs, Gen Ukraine and Permaculture in Ukraine, joined forces and collected support from all our friends from different countries and distributed it to Ukrainian locations where lots and lots of people from cities had it as cities were under attack, and our locations, most of them are in relatively safe places. Apart from hosting people, different communities also hosted animals abandoned because of the war, shared food in the first months of the full-scale invasion. And one of the focuses of our permaculture network now is rehabilitation work for children, for families of our warriors, for people traumatized because of the war. With garden therapy, with art therapy, and with work with animals. Now, on the third year of the war, we continue our life here. We continue growing food, raising children, hosting events. We are grateful to Starhawk for coming in person and giving a training here in my community for different activists from eco-village networks, permaculture networks, and from other organizations. We have lots of challenges because living in a country with war is not an easy thing. You can have your beautiful garden full of flowers, bees, and crops, but you continue reading news. You regularly see missiles in your sky going towards big cities, and you have some community members at the front line. The economical situation, the political situation in our country is not the best. But we have no other choice that continue our life and doing our best for our families, for our communities, for our countries. We would be grateful for any kind of support. You can come in person as volunteer, as trainer, or if you want to send any donations, we would be grateful for it. You can contact Starhawk and she will give you our contacts. And if you have more questions, you can contact our organization also.
I like this pretty flower, and this is my name, and my name is Veronica. I love this handkerchief. I love it when something is green or white or pink and black. And I like this.
So that's a little visit with our friends in Ukraine. So I'd like to just take a moment now and maybe just hold some thoughts for the people who are doing regeneration on the edge of war. Our friends in Ukraine and our friends in Lebanon. We also have friends in the West Bank and Palestine who are doing permaculture. Everywhere that there's war and destruction, there are people that are also working to do healing and regeneration. And that's something that I think can give us some hope. But I'm going to have Charles also put into the chat some resources our friends in Lebanon have sent us that you can use to donate, to connect to groups that are doing regenerative work, and also just to get more information about what's happening there and really see from the people there what's actually going on. You know, it's an interesting time right now where, you know, it's not like in the past when wars would happen and only a few war correspondents would see or communicate about them. Now, when they happen, you've got everyone with cell phones and with internet access, and it's impossible to actually hide the pain and the atrocities. So maybe let's just take a breath and send out some love and protection. For all those who are working for the earth and for regeneration and for their communities, in spite of war, in spite of violence. And blessed be. So we want to open it up a little bit now and give you a chance to ask questions, which you can do in the chat or by using the raise your hand feature down below. Pay. I see your hands up.
Hi, Starhawk.
Hi,
Nice to see you.
nice to see you too.
Boy, that's amazing that you stayed in all those eco villages. I just can't believe it. So my thought is how realistic is it to actually go to that one in Ukraine and volunteer in terms of getting there and travel? Or do you have any idea? Well, I guess you did, but if I were to consider that.
It was a journey to get there. You know, I went to Moldova, and from Moldova, you can get a train to Kiev. It takes about 19 hours. So I was able to get a sleeping car, but you get on at 5 in the evening and then you arrive there around noon or 1 the next day. There are people who go there to volunteer, like Martin, the guy at Camasteo who is wearing the red skirt.
Yeah.
He's actually been going every year to volunteer. And he actually traveled there with me and came to the training and then stayed on in Kiev and volunteered with groups that were making camo netting for the army. There's also other groups that are volunteering to do things like food and other things, but
Right.
you could write to the people at Gen Ukraine and find out what the options are for coming and volunteering.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I put in the text or the chat rather that you were also at our eco village.
Yes.
Maybe you said just Europe, which would exclude it, but otherwise you did that and all the others.
That's true, yeah. Our eco village is in British Columbia, in Shawnigan Lake near Duncan. And it's a really amazing example of a place that's been there for, what, about 20, 25 years now.
Yeah.
They have some of the most beautiful natural buildings that they've done of any eco village that I've been at. But also, what really impresses me about our eco village is that over the years they've worked really hard to establish good connections with the local indigenous tribes, the Cowichan people. And they've done that and have collaborated with them. Not this year, but the year before, they actually hosted a big gathering of 300 or 400 indigenous folks to come together to work on peacemaking. And the Cowichan tribe was doing a sacred walk every year for 4 years that the Eco Village helped support from one part of Vancouver Island to their part. And people took part in that walk and also helped support with food. And for the last couple of years, we actually got invited to the feast at the end, which was a big deal because it's only been in the last few years that the tribe has opened up to inviting in outsiders to any of their places or ceremonies.
Really?
So that was really a big honor. Uh, and I think they're a really great example on this side of the water of actually establishing right relations with the indigenous folks around you and making available some of the skills and resources. So we have uh, we did a design project a couple years ago for one of the elders of designing a food forest for his backyard, and then some people stayed on and planted it and created it. And this last year we were able to go and put some work into weeding and sprucing it up a little bit, and also did some clearing of invasives and some other work, and a number of design projects, and now the elder uh, has a vision of doing food forests in all of the 7 villages on the reserve that we're going to help support over time.
Wow. And also the medicine garden at our eco village.
That's right.
That's exciting. I'm trying to get a hold of Heineke to see where things are at, because I don't think there's much activity in the WhatsApp. What's
Yeah.
it called? Whatever it's called, the chat, and to see how things are progressing. Yeah.
Yes. Our eco village is going to devote a whole area to a medicine garden for local indigenous healing plants that one of the local people we taught with this time, Heineke, really beautiful. I don't know if you call her an elder. I guess she's an elder. She's sort of an elder in spirit, even if she isn't all that old. But um, she's going to be working with them to help plant that garden and install it and get it up and working for people.
We have a
So,
few questions in the chat.
uh-huh. So I see, are these villages actively creating accessible spaces for disabled, low income, no income people? I would say that that varies from village to village. I'd say definitely they're creating accessibility for low and no income people. Camasteo, like I said, you can live there for like 150 euros a month. As far as physical accessibility, not so much. Like I was saying, Lazad, their one composting toilet for the museum and library was up the rickety staircase. So that was something we did talk with them about, since I'm now have reached an age and level of physical challenges that make me much more aware of those things. I think it's really important awareness for communities to have. Um, I see. What are your top 5 building blocks of building a community, becoming a community? Great question. Diana Leaf Christian, who has written a number of really wonderful books on intentional communities, has a book called Creating a Life Together. And she says for her, the three things you need are you need community glue, like things that bond people, things that create good feelings, like eating together, uh, common rituals or common work days or fun things that you do together, celebrations. You need good communication skills and conflict resolution. And the third is you need good project management. You need people who can actually get things done and organize them. And I think those are good ones to look at. When I wrote a book called The Empowerment Manual, a guide for collaborative groups. And I put together something there I call the mandala of healthy groups, which I could probably show you if I quickly look at where it would be. And that was looking at the idea of what are the things that we need um, in a community. And how do you put them together in ways that, there it is. Okay. So go along with the four directions and the four elements. So the idea is you've got earth, air, fire, water, and then the center is spirit. So air is communication, accountability. Air is like the mind and concepts. Water is emotion and trust. Those two have to be in balance. In order to have trust and have good feelings, you have to have clear communication. And if you trust people, you also have to have ways of holding them accountable. And then got fire and earth. Fire is energy, is power, and earth is solidity, responsibility. And responsibility and power need to be in balance, so that when people take on a responsibility, they're given the power they need to carry it out. And when people um, gain power by taking on responsibility, not by like having the right skin color or clothing or some superficial thing, or by having the loudest, angriest voice or having the most money, but by taking up responsibility and contributing to the group. And when those are all in balance, they're held in the circle of the group vision, and they create the axis of action and of learning. Because when you're communicating well, you're always learning. And when you've got power and responsibility together, you can take action. And that's what generates the spirit of the group. So that's a little more conceptual, but that's some of the things we're going to be doing. A 6-week course online in empowering collaborative groups that's going to be based on some of the work in my book. That's going to start in October. And maybe Charles can also put in the chat the information about that. If people are interested, we go more deeply into all those aspects of communication and power, of vision, and of conflict resolution tools. And how do you deal with people who have, I like Diana Leaf Christian's formulation of especially challenging behaviors. The people who turn up and somehow or other manage to completely destroy your group just by being themselves. We've probably all run into them. Maybe sometimes we all are them. But there are things that we can do to help avoid that outcome. They're not always easy. So yeah, if you're interested, that's in the chat. Are there other questions? I'll also say some of the work I'm doing right now, inspired by our current political situation, is thinking about how do we do better and more effective movement building on a broad scale. And why does the right wing have such an appeal, even to people who actually should be, the people who feel left behind, who feel left out of the system, who are angry at the inequality? Shouldn't those be the people the left is organizing? Why are those people so susceptible to being pulled into the right wing, this neo-fascist movement? And I think it's because the right wing has done a better job than the left wing has at meeting some of our core human needs for things like belonging and value and a sense of meaning and purpose in life. So if people are interested in following that, I'm actually decided to write a book chapter by chapter on Substack. And you can subscribe to it on Substack. It's free, there's no paywall, although I'm certainly always grateful if people do want to support it financially as well. It's my feeling that we really need to build and think about building a much stronger progressive and regenerative movement for the long term, so that we aren't always in this situation where vote for somebody who maybe doesn't reflect all of our ideals and goals and policies, in order to prevent some major evil from happening. I'll get you the link for the Substack. Other questions?
There's one more in chat. It says, each site you visited was founded on sometimes very different ways. Was there any commonalities you found in the methods of conflict resolution that helped them to sustain for many years?
I would say that what has helped them sustain for many years is embracing and directly dealing with their conflicts. And not all of them, I know both at Lazad and Camasteo, they've had some bitter conflicts and some extremely difficult, like Martin actually was like physically attacked by somebody who went after him with an axe at one point at Camasteo. This goes way beyond the scope of what's acceptable community behavior. I would say that what's common is learning that you have to be able to set boundaries with people. Sometimes you have to be willing to ask people to leave if you're going to have a functional community. At Lazad, they had major conflicts when the airport was canceled and the option for some of them to go through a route of getting legalized emerged. There were some really bitter conflicts in the community between the people who wanted to go the route and stay and get legalized and actually take root in the community, and the people who didn't want to cooperate with the state and wanted to be autonomous, um, and eventually those people left or were evicted, and the people who wanted to stay and put down roots were the ones who stayed. But it was a challenging conflict. I would also say that I feel like the eco-village movement on the whole is gradually learning better conflict resolution tools. And I think that's one of the ways in which it can play a useful role, and contribute to an even broader movement of community regeneration, is being a kind of laboratory for how do we develop, what are kind of good practices around communication, what are good tools for conflict resolution. Um, and yeah, that's some of the stuff we deal with in the online course. I should also say we're going to do an in-person course for 4 days at a place called Golden Rocks Permaculture in Lake County in December. And learn some of the stuff and do some of this work in person. And I can also put that in the chat. That's going to be December 4th through 8th. So I think we probably have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions. If anyone has a last question you want to ask. Ronnie Joy.
Hello, Star. I'm delighted to connect with you. What is the role of Earth spirituality in the eco villages? I teach a course about that, so my students are very interested in that.
Well, again, that varies a lot from place to place. On this trip to France, we did a ritual. We had a talk, and then it ended with a big ritual and spiral dance at Lazade. And that was kind of a big thing because, French culture has not embraced spirituality very easily. It's taken a long time for the French who are activists to be at all open to anything spiritual. But that seems to be changing in the last few years. And we also did a big spiral dance at the Eco Village conference. For me, I think spirituality meets some of those core human needs. It's a way you can create a positive sense of belonging that doesn't have to make someone else the other in order for you to feel like you belong, right? It does all the things that we do as humans to feel that deeper sense of connection, like singing and chanting and dancing and sharing from the heart. And it creates opportunities for celebration and for people to be seen and be valued and be creative without, without being judged and without having to be competitive. And I think it gives a sense of deeper meaning and purpose that we all need. So not every eco-village has a spiritual foundation, but I think the ones that do, it really helps create, again, that stronger sense of bonding and connection.
Thank you. I'm thinking even if it's not expressed as spirituality, the sense of living interconnected with the land, a deep connection would be in its essence spiritual.
Yes, and I think that people who are attracted to eco-village living mostly are people who want that connection with the land. And they might not think of it as religion or given a name, but they're often people who feel that sense most deeply in nature.
Thanks. That's beautiful. I appreciate it. Blessings for your work. I love what you're doing.
Thank you. Well, I think it's time for us to say our thank yous. So I want to say thank you to all of you for joining us. And again, a big thank you to all of those around the world who are working for regeneration and healing, especially those who are doing it in the face of war and violence. I want to say thank you to Charles and to our whole Earth Activist team for helping to put this together and helping us promote it, and to my friend Allie, who does a lot of that work for me, and to all the folks at the Eco Villages who hosted us, and all the volunteers. I know Pei and Sherry are here and came and helped and volunteered this summer, different places. And Charles, you want to thank the elements?
Yeah. Thank you to our interpreters, and thank you to Starhawk. And thank you to the elements: earth, water, fire, and air. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for spirit. And thank you for all of you.
Yeah, big thank you for our interpreters. And our circle is open but unbroken. Do you have a song for us?
I think I do.